It is December the 19th, and I really don't think we're going to have to worry about having a white Christmas this year. Don't think it's going to be an issue. Nothing to dream about. It's just kind of open up your doors and windows, and there it is. My sister, who lives in Calgary, the poor city of Calgary, asked me, she's coming up next week sometime or after Christmas, and she asked me if we have drifts up here, because she loves it when she comes up here to Edmonton and we have drifts. And I'm saying, Sherry, we have drifts. Not a problem. Come on up. We've got it. So, how are you doing? All the Christmas shopping done? So, okay, so we got some that are done, some that are not started. Yeah, and we got one that finished last year's. That's always a good thing. We finished last year's. I've got a couple more things left, yet to buy for somebody that is in my family. We aren't sure who, but hey. Yes, it's Craig, you're right. Gotta get Craig the new purse he wants. Sorry, I need to get on my notes really fast here. I went to a funeral actually yesterday. I went down to Sundre, southern Alberta, or central Alberta, and little town of Sundre, where actually I graduated high school. Just so you know, there's some trivia for you. I graduated high school from the immense, huge, enormous school that's called Sundre High School. My graduating class had 51 people in it. Most of them wore tuxes. I wore a suit. One guy wore a plaid shirt and jeans. So we just kind of, the two of us, the suit and the plaid guy, we kind of looked kind of strange in this row of tuxes. But yeah, that was my graduating class. 51 people. 19-something. 1978. 1978, I graduated high school. After the 17th, no, just kidding. I graduated first time. But I went down because we had a friend of the family that passed away. So I was down for the funeral yesterday. And as I was thinking this week of the funeral and the family and all the rest of it, I was thinking about, the mixed bag of relationships that it really was with them. I mean, this was a family that was close to me. I want to make sure that that this was an important family. But still, in your important relationships, when you let your guard down and people see who you really are, it really can be kind of a mixed bag. The relationship. Erlene was the lady who died. She died of cancer, and she was 68 years old. And she was the one that actually did my hair and my wife's hair, but especially my hair at our wedding. She came to our wedding, Victoria, and she made sure our hair looked, especially my hair, looked really good. But yeah, so so this is the family. And to be honest with you, she had a husband, and her husband I was always scared of. I don't know why. He just, he just really scared me. So I just didn't, hang around too much. She had two kids, Donald and Annette. And Donald and Annette were both younger than I am, just, kind of a couple years. Annette and Donald was maybe 3 years younger than Annette was, so they were just a little younger than I was. And so we had this annoying little kid friend kind of thing going on, depending on what the moment was. And so it was just kind of like a bit of a mixed bag. Now, the family was important to me, but there was kind of like this little bit of, it was a little messy. And I started to think, isn't that really the way our important relationships often are? They're just sometimes a little messy. When you let somebody get inside, we all want to put up this facade and say, this is who I am. And we kind of stand behind it. And it's really not who we are. And every once in a while, we'll let somebody come behind it and get around that facade which we have so nicely placed in front of us and see who we really are. And then the relationships are very good, but sometimes very messy. I can't put up the screen anymore. I can't pretend. Mark Batterson, some of you, or not Mark Beeson, sorry. Some of you remember Mark Beeson and from One Prayer. And he's the pastor of Granger Community Church in Granger, Indiana. And Mark tells a story some of you have heard about playing Kick the Can. Anybody play Kick the Can? Couple of you? For those of you who can't remember the rules, Kick the Can is a game that's kind of like hide and go seek, but not really. You start off with somebody who is it, and in playing Kick the Can, usually you want to be not it. And so the way we choose it, not it, is when you get together and decide you're going to play, you yell, not it. And the last person to yell, not it, is it. Got it. So we're ready for a game after church here. So whoever they cover their eyes and they count to 100 if they know how to count that high, and then they come and they find you. And when they find you, it's 1, 2, 3 on Greg, and then you have to race Greg to the can. And if Craig kicks the can first, then he gets to go free along with anybody in jail. But if it gets to the can first, then you have to go. You're caught. And you have to go to jail. That's Kick the Can. Thus the name Kick the Can. So really an original piece of naming there. So Mark was saying, they loved on his block to play Kick the Can. But there was one kid. His name was Alvin. And Alvin wasn't quite right. You met somebody kind of like me. He's just not quite right. And so you never played Kick the Can when Alvin was around. Because for one thing, Alvin would never say not it. He would say it. So, you're going to play Kick the Can? Yeah, I'll be it. You never trust anybody who wants to be it. It's just not a good thing. And then, he would cheat. He wouldn't hide his eyes. He'd hide his eyes kind of like this. And then, whether he couldn't count to 100 or just didn't want to count to 100, he just very seldom got up that high. It was like, 1, 2, ready or not, here I come. And so you just didn't play when Alvin was around. Well, Mark says there was this one time they were kind of gathering as a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, and somebody was standing there, and Alvin was behind him, and he didn't know Alvin was there. And so this kid decided, hey, let's play Kick the Can. And all of a sudden this voice came from behind him. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm it. 1. And little kids just went everywhere because they were running for their lives. I mean, they were scared because Alvin was going to be it. And another thing, Alvin didn't say the 1, 2, 3 on. Instead, he'd sneak up behind you, put you in a headlock, and drag you to the can. So, Alvin is now it, and so kids run for their lives. And Mark says that he found this spot. He just ran and dove into Mrs. Porter's garden, which Mrs. Porter probably wouldn't be happy about. But he dove into Mrs. Porter's garden right behind some shrubbery with an evergreen tree. And that was his hiding spot for Kick the Can. And he said it was kind of neat because he found out very quickly that while he could see out, nobody could see in. So Alvin went 1, 2, 3, ready or not, here I come. And then he went out and he started finding kids. And from where he sat, Mark could see what was going on. And he saw all of his little friends being dragged back to the can in a headlock and put in jail. And nobody wanted to be in jail. And of course, in Kick the Can, if you are free and you come and kick the can, then you set everybody in jail free. And so they started to realize that not all the people had been caught, that there's still somebody that was still out there. And so all of his little friends started calling, Mark, Mark, come save us. And Mark thought, I can do this. I can be the hero. I can save. And then he'd hear Alvin, Beeson, when I find you, I'm going to kill you. And then you think, maybe not. Maybe I can't save them. I can't go out. And so he had this kind of moment in the shrubbery in Mrs. Porter's garden behind the shrubbery with the evergreen tree over top of him, where he was going, I can do it. I can be the hero. No, I can't. I can't be the hero. Yes, I can. I can be the hero. No, I can't. I can't be the hero. And it went on. And Mark says he actually stayed in his hiding spot that day until the game was over and all the kids went home. And it was such an important point in Mark's life, because it was the one point he could look back at and said, I wish I had done that differently. I wish on that day I could have been the hero. And that story, I think, touches us. It touches me, because we all have those moments where we wish that we could have done something differently. We know the points in our lives where we said, I wish I could have done this instead of what I did do. I wish I could have gone out and been the hero, but instead I stayed in Mrs. Porter's shrubbery, hiding from whoever was it. Our lives are sometimes a bit of a mess. It's just the way it is. And there are things that we regret. And before you fall asleep on me, here's my point of the sermon this morning, so you won't miss anything. I believe that God, in the incarnation at Christmas, what we celebrate right now, steps into exactly where you are. God met Mark Beeson in the shrubbery, underneath the evergreen, right in the mess that he was in. God doesn't come above us. He doesn't come below us. He meets us exactly where we need to be, or where we need him to be. I want to read from John chapter 1. We're going to read the first 14 verses, but I'm going to tell you right up front, I'm going to talk about verse 14. But I just want to read in context. It's a wonderful passage. So if you have your Bibles, or if you have your notes, or it's on the screen, here it is. John chapter 1. And John chapter 1 starts off, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. There came a man who was sent from God, and his name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and through the world was made through, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, and to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. Verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. I'd like you to read that last verse with me. Would you do that? We'll read it, verse 14 again. It'll be on the screen. It's also on your notes. Verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. I'm just going to take a walk through verse 14, and it starts off with the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Your blank there is Jesus became like me. Jesus became like me. I got to admit, sometimes, now I'll never admit this other than right now, so don't throw this at me later. Just between us friends. Sometimes I think pastors overstate things when we're preaching. Sometimes we get a little bit. Now, I got to admit, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we can't get up to it. So when Leslie gets up here and describes the crucifixion, she does a wonderful job at it. And she probably doesn't go far enough. I mean, she's, that was just an absolutely horrific thing. But sometimes when we get up here, we kind of overstate things. And I think this is one place where pastors have been guilty of overstating it. So here it is. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Now, I don't know what it is like for you, but for me, I get imagery at this point. I grew up in the church. I grew up reading the Bible. I know the Bible stories, and I know what Matthew says, and I know what Luke says about him coming to dwell. And so we've got songs about it. We sang some of them this morning. The Way in a Manger. We know that Jesus came from his place in heaven and stepped down into a manger. And sometimes pastors will get up and they'll pound pulpits. I think I dented it. Anyways. And they'll say things like, understand that this was not a sterilized barn like we have in some of our manger scenes. This was pooey. It stunk like animals. It was awful. Jesus came into this barn to be born for us. And I get what they're saying, but sometimes I wonder if just maybe we're overstating it just a bit. Here's my point. Many of you know that what I like to do in my summers is I will read what I call relaxing reading. Now, most of that's science fiction, I admit. But last summer I decided I wanted to start reading some semi-classics. So one of the things I wanted to read was The Three Musketeers, which I had read a few years earlier, plus the 5 books that followed it. And so I started reading through the story of D'Artagnan and Porthos and Aramis and Athos. And in one of the books, now this is set in the late 1600s, early 1700s, in one of the books the king is on the move. Louis XIV is moving, and probably very similar today, the king does not go out by himself on the move. There are a whole bunch of people that come with him. He has an entourage. And so in the story that Dumas writes about this king, which is a real king, Louis XIV, he writes a story about King Louis being on the move and all these people coming with him. And what that meant was that there was a pecking order. When they arrived at the town where they were going to sleep for the night, some people got beds because there was room in the inn. But if you weren't high enough in the pecking order, you didn't get a bed. You had to go make other arrangements. So in the story, D'Artagnan and Porthos decide that they are going to make some money. And so they get to the town where Louis is going to end up that night, and they buy up all of the hay. All of it. They go around and just buy dirt cheap all of the hay until they own all of the hay in the town. Then King comes into the town, and he brings in all of his people with him, and they all come, and the pecking order, the people who get beds, and then the rest of them don't get beds. And D'Artagnan owns all of the hay. So what he does, he sets himself up in business and says, listen, I've got some hay I can sell you for a little bit of a price. And he makes some money off of it. And the way Dumas tells the story, it was like, well, this is normal. What else do you do when you come into a town and there's no room in the inn? Of course, you buy some hay, you find a place of shelter, maybe in a stable, maybe under a tree, and you lie down and you have a sleep. Now for us, that is absolutely impossible. Come on. You walk into a hotel room and there's a hair there, you go absolutely nuts. And if there's mold in the shower, well, it's probably black mold and you're dying now. But back in not that long ago, 300 years, 400 years ago, the whole idea that just maybe you might have to sleep on hay was not a big idea. It was just the way things were. So we have this story of Jesus coming, and he enters into the situation, and he comes and there's no room at the inn. Very similar to the story that Dumas told in the 1600s and 1700s, only now it's a young couple about to have a baby. And what do you do when there's no room at the inn? You find a stable, someplace where there's hay, and you bed down there. And maybe have your baby there. Maybe the comparison for us is going to the Royal Alec, where everything's way too busy and they're always understaffed, and having to have your baby there rather than at, I don't know, Sturgeon, Misericordia, somewhere else. Is it possible that the manger story that we read is that God entered into our situation? He became like us. Not he became below us, or that he was above us. He entered into our situation. He came into where we are. So whatever it is that you're going through right now, whatever it is that's happening in your life, God enters in to that very situation and says, I know exactly what it's like to be there. He enters into where we are. The word there that is translated, he dwells among us, is actually, I put it in your notes, it's skenao. Can you say that with me? Skenao. Skenao. And that means he spread his tabernacle over us. Now the tabernacle was the place that had the Holy of Holies. It was, his place. And this word in there that literally says that God came and spread his tabernacle over you. And what that means, I think, is that he made you holy. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians 3 that we love to quote to tell us that we shouldn't smoke and be overweight and all the rest of things. That says that, don't you know that the body is the temple of God. And actually that verse we need to forget about, because it's actually talking about the church. And it's more talking about gossip and backbiting than anything else. But if you want a verse that supports the other, this is the one. Do you not know that God came in the incarnation and he spread his tabernacle over you? That he made you holy. And that he does not want to leave you where you are, but he wants to come in and help you with your life. God came in to where you are. Continuing to read. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father. The blank is Jesus sacrificed something. I grew up in a Christian family, which meant we had Bibles around. Now, the Bibles that we had when I was growing up were all King James Version Bibles. So, what would happen is, I would go to my grandmother's place. It was a Sunday thing. We went to church, and then we went over to Grandma's place. And Grandma, well, the whole I never got this as a kid, but the whole family seemed to like to take naps. It's like church wore them out, so they went home and slept. Which meant all of us little kids had to go take a nap, and none of us little kids wanted to take a nap. But it was enforced on us. We had to go and take this nap. So I would go into the spare room at Grandma's. That would be my place, and I've got to lie down for X number of minutes or whatever it was. And so I would go in there and I would lay down and have my nap. Well, to be honest with you, sometimes I just didn't feel like sleeping. So I'd play. Or sometimes I would get out the Bible and read it. I don't know how many times I read through the book of Jude, which is like 28 verses long. Just so that afterwards I could get up from my nap and say, I don't know what you guys are doing, but I read through a book of the Bible while you were sleeping. But listen to how King James Version says this verse 1, John 1:14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. That word begotten means derived from something. So we read in the Bible, especially the King James Version, that Adam and Eve begat Cain and Abel and Seth. That Abraham begat Isaac. That Isaac begat Esau and Jacob. That Jacob begat Judah and Daniel and Benjamin and all the rest of them. And it's derived from. So the problem is sometimes we read this verse and say, well, did Jesus derive from? God. And early on in church history, we had an argument over that. Some people thought that there was a time when Jesus was not. And we argued, no, Jesus always was. There was never a time when Jesus wasn't. And so we had this little bit of an argument. Finally, the people who won the argument decided that, yes, Jesus always was. Just like John 1:1 said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. There was never a time when Jesus was not. So then the question becomes, what do we do with this word begat? And the word that is translated that in the King James and is one and only in the NIV is monogenes. Monogenes. Can you say monogenes with me? Monogenes. Somebody asked you what you did in church this morning, just say it was all Greek to me. Monogenes is the word. And what monogenes literally means is an only child. Do we have any only children here? It's got a few of them. Didn't have any in my last service. So like you're the ones that mom and dad discovered what they were doing to cause children, and after you were born they just said, no, it's not worth it. They're not smiling over here, but yeah, it means basically unique and different and only of. I am not monogenes. Believe it or not, and this is probably not a good thing for the world, there are two of me. I have a little sister who's 4 years younger, and we are both derived from Dwayne and Shirley. So I am not monogenes. I have a sister, but some of you are monogenes. And the point here, actually, when we're talking about Jesus, is not that he was begotten, and that's why that's not in the NIV. We've kind of gotten rid of that word, because that's not really what we're talking about. We're saying that Jesus was unique. He was one and only. He was the only one, and he was from the Father. He pre-existed before Bethlehem, and he sacrificed something. We know the sacrifice at Easter when he died, but he sacrificed something when he stepped off the throne and came down and was born in a manger. And he was one and only. And he stepped into our situation, and he became like us so that he could help us through our situations and our problems and our troubles. He was the one and the only. He was one and only Son of the Father when he was in heaven. He's one and only when he gave up his throne and he came down and it was incarnation for us, changing our world. He was one and only when he died on a cross. He was one and only when he ascended. There is no one like Jesus. And only he could do that. Not that he is derived from somebody, but he is unique. And our world needed him. The last part of that verse just simply says, full of grace and truth. And that blank is, Jesus gives what I need. Maybe not what I want, but what I need. He comes in full of grace and truth. We had a movie night here on Friday night. We watched Jim Carrey's A Christmas Carol, Scrooge. And as I was sitting here watching the movie, I thought, wow, there's a lot of places where Scrooge gets the truth, right? When he goes back in time and he sees that boy, which is himself, and his sister coming and meeting him, and that the memory was painful, and he said, oh, do I have to go see that? Is that the memory that I have to be? Because that hurts. That's truth, but that hurts. When he stepped into the present and went to his nephew's party and heard them all laughing and playing games and making fun of Uncle Scrooge, that hurt. He wasn't sure that he wanted to be there. When he went to the funeral of that man who was so evil that everybody just was making fun of and stealing from, that hurt. He wondered if it might be him, but that was painful truth. And part of what I want to say is Jesus comes full of grace and truth. So the truth part is when we come in contact with a holy God, it hurts. Because he sees us where we don't want to see him. He sees us in the bush in Mrs. Porter's house. It hurts to be there. We don't want him to see us in that point. We would rather him see us when we're out doing good, not in our low points. But Jesus comes in truth, and that means that there is pain as he comes to us in truth. But he also comes to us in grace. He is full of grace and truth. And while his truth hurts, his grace calls us and says, listen, I accept you. You are important to me. A few months ago, we had a group come through Edmonton. They were a Baptist group, I think, which is sometimes not a good thing. But they were a Baptist group that came through, and they were preaching hate against homosexuals. And sometimes I just don't get it. I mean, I know where I came from. I know the grace that I needed. I'm not sure that I get how we ever get to preach hate. A friend of mine in Portland said that he would have liked to have gone up when they were in Portland and joined them. But unfortunately, he says, I'm a little too fiery for that. And what they like you to do is come and confront them. And then they'll goad you into a fight with them. And after you punch them, they will sue you, financing the rest of their trip. And he just said, I just didn't want to finance the rest of their trip, so I stayed away. But he said, I wanted to go. And he said, I decided if I could just do it. I'd like to dress up like them and have a picket sign. Only my picket sign would read something like, stay in school or you'll turn out like me. Or something like that. And people would walk by and say, oh, there's some humor there at least, But how do we get to preach hate? I have a cousin who preaches the gospel. I think I've mentioned him a couple times before, but he preaches the gospel by going and chaining himself to abortion equipment. And to abortion equipment. He chains himself to abortion equipment. And I get it. But inside of me, something says, here's a young lady scared out of her mind. And we have a choice on what we say. We can either tell her that God loves her and sacrifice for her, or we can tell her that God hates her. And sometimes I think we choose the wrong thing. Now, I'm not saying I'm defending either one of those issues. All I'm saying is that God came full of truth and of grace. And we are the incarnation for the world. The world needs love. They need his love, and they need to feel it from us. I went to a funeral yesterday. Erlene Manier was her name. Mentioned it right at the very beginning. And Erlene she owned a hair salon back when Nell and I got married. She sold that and moved on to selling cars and became a top salesman for the local dealership. And Erlene was a very tall woman. Very tall. And she was also a sports fan. She loved sports. And she went to as top sales lady for the dealership, she went to a GM dinner thing that they had. And there was a special speaker. And they didn't know who the special speaker was, but Erlene was in the dinner and she looked up and she saw this man in the wings, and she leaned over to her boss and said, "That can't be the speaker. Is that who I think it is?" And sure enough, a couple minutes later, out walked this man. His name was Bobby Orr. And he walked out. He was the special speaker of the evening. And Erlene was tall. And so she got up and she started clapping Bobby Orr. Well, kind of. She actually didn't just stand up. In fact, she didn't just stand up on her chair. She got right up on the table to clap and welcome Bobby Orr into the meeting. Here's this tall woman standing on a table welcoming Bobby Orr. Later, she was instrumental in bringing NBC basketball camps to Canada. She phoned up the founder of it down in the States and said that, he said the way he said it is, I just gotten a phone call from a guy who wanted me to come up and preach in Calgary and Edmonton and Winnipeg and Toronto and Montreal, 1,000, 1,500 people at each place. And I said, well, if I come, I want to also talk in schools. And they said, well, no, we can't do that. So he said that I'm not coming. So then he gets this lady from Sundre, Alberta. He said, I don't know where Sundre is. And this lady asked me if I'll come speak. And she says she's got a bunch of little things in central Alberta where I can come and speak. And she said, well, he says, I really would like to talk in schools. And she said, well, we can do that too. And she said, well, tell you what, phone me back at the end of the week and we'll think about it. He said, I hung up and I already decided. The answer was no, not coming. At the end of the week, Erlene phones back and says, listen, I've got 7 places and 11 schools for you to speak in. And this guy goes, well, how in the world do I say no now? She's already got the 11 schools, which the other guy in Calgary told me was impossible. So he came up to speak and he spoke to teens and she listened to him every place where he went. And then at the end of the week, and she was driving him back to the airport, she said, how do we get NBC basketball camps in Canada? And he said, well, I'm not sure that we can. But Erlene didn't take no easily. And so she basically twisted his arm until there was one started up in Olds, and now there's quite a few in Canada. And every year she'd come and she would volunteer at these basketball camps. And as he was speaking at her funeral, he said, Erlene asked me this past summer if I would speak at her funeral. And I said only if she'd speak at mine. But he said, it is my granddaughter's birthday weekend. But I had to come. Because Erlene Menier has been standing on a table cheering for me for 20 years. And she says, and she's been cheering for each one of you for as long as you've known her. She's been up on the table cheering for you. Wanting you to go beyond. This morning we're almost at Christmas. And I just want you to know that Jesus is standing on a table cheering for you. He wants you to make a difference. He met you in that place where you didn't want him to meet you, where you were so ashamed that you were, where you were hiding and whatever else was going on. He came and he met you and he said, listen, I want to take you from this spot and allow you to make the difference that you want to make. And I will cheer you on every step of the way. And I really, again, I've said I have a high view of the church. I believe we are the body of Christ. I believe we are here to make a difference. I believe that while Jesus became the incarnation in our world, we continue to be the incarnation in this world. The actual presence of God here. And my question is, who are you cheering for? Are you up on a table absolutely cheering for the people that you worship with in this place? Do people look at this building and the only thing they can think of is, oh, look at how they love each other? Are you cheering for the community that you are in? And for the people that you meet at work and everything else that you do? Are you just up on a table cheering for them because they are important to you and they are important to Jesus? Are you being the incarnation in this world? We are here not just to sit and listen and then go away. We are to make a difference. And we kind of wish, I know, Richard Neubauer wrote, that we kind of wish that we would have a God without wrath that would call man without sin into a kingdom without judgment, ministered to by a Christ without a cross. But the reality is that the Christ suffered on the cross, and he also suffered in the manger when he came down. And he continues to suffer because he is in love with you. He is totally infatuated by you. And he cheers you on. And he asks us to follow in his footsteps and cheer on the community that is around us. And we have a choice. We can choose to say that we hate and find things to stand against, or we can say, you know what? I'm standing on a table and I'm cheering for you. I've chosen to stand on the table. Let me pray. Father, I don't get it sometimes. I've said this before, but you came and you died for me. And God, you stood on a table and cheered me on. And sometimes, Lord, it seems so easy for us to hate. But you came in love. You came full of truth, which hurt us, but grace, which called us into relationship with you. You forgave us of all of the things that we needed forgiveness for. And God, we are getting closer to that day when we will welcome you as a child in a manger in Bethlehem. Remember the day that you came to us. You came to us, you cheered us on, you loved us. And God, now, help us to be the incarnation you need us to be right here in Delwood, right here in Edmonton. Help us to love, to make a difference, to be the incarnation this world needs. Help us to get up off our butts and stand on some tables and cheer the people around us on, because you did first. This Christmas, don't let us slide by thinking about just what we're going to get. Help us to remember that you came to love us and to teach us to love others. May they know we are Christians by our love. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.